The morning sun barely touched the peaks of the Sierra Madre Mountains when Diego Herrera stood on his ranch's front porch, staring at the endless acres that stretched before him. At 38, he owned more land than most men could dream of, yet he felt emptier than the vast plains that surrounded his home. His boots echoed against the wooden floor as he walked back inside the grand house his grandfather had built. The walls were lined with family portraits, stern-faced men with their wives and children, generation after generation of Herreras who had built this empire from nothing. But Diego's portrait would be different. It would show just him, alone. "Mijo, you cannot keep avoiding this conversation." His mother's voice cut through his thoughts. Doña Carmen Herrera entered the dining room where Diego sat with his untouched breakfast, her silk dress rustling with each determined step. Behind her came his father, Don Roberto, whose weathered hands had built the family fortune, but whose sharp eyes still missed nothing. "The Mendoza family has a beautiful daughter," his mother continued, setting down a photograph of a young woman in an expensive dress. "She's educated, well-mannered, and from a good family. What more could you want?" Diego pushed the photograph away without looking. "I've met her, Mama. She's nice enough, but what?" His father's voice boomed across the room. "You're almost 40 years old, Diego. This ranch needs heirs. Our family name needs to continue. You can't keep making excuses forever." "I'm not making excuses. I just haven't found the right woman." His parents exchanged glances. They'd had this conversation dozens of times before, and it always ended the same way, with Diego walking away and his parents growing more frustrated. "The right woman?" Doña Carmen laughed bitterly. "You've rejected every suitable girl in 3 counties. What exactly are you looking for? Some fairy tale princess who doesn't exist?" Diego stood up, his chair scraping against the stone floor. "I want what you and Papa have. I want love." The silence that followed was heavy. His parents had been married for 42 years, and their love story was legendary in the region. But times were different now, they often reminded him. Marriage was about family, stability, and continuing traditions. "Love comes after marriage, mijo," his mother said softly. "It grows between 2 people who respect each other and build a life together." But Diego had seen too many marriages like that. Cold, business-like arrangements that produced children, but little happiness. He wanted more than that, even if he wasn't sure what more looked like. 3 weeks later, Diego found himself in the cantina in San Miguel, the small town at the foot of the mountains. He wasn't a drinking man, but sometimes the weight of his family's expectations drove him to seek solitude among strangers. "You look like a man with problems," said the bartender, a grizzled old man named Felipe who'd seen everything the mountains had to offer. "Just thinking," Diego replied, nursing his beer. "About a woman, I'd guess. It's always about a woman when a man has that look." Diego was about to deny it when Felipe leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I might know someone who could help you with your situation." "What do you mean?" "There's a family up in the mountains, the Delgados. Good people, but they've fallen on hard times. Very hard times." Felipe glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "They owe money to some dangerous people. The kind who don't forgive debts," Diego frowned. "What does this have to do with me?" "They have a daughter. Beautiful girl, but different. Wild, you might say. No man in the village has been able to handle her. Her father is desperate enough that he might consider arrangements." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke. Diego felt a chill run down his spine. "You're talking about buying a wife." "I'm talking about helping a family in trouble while solving your problem with your parents," Felipe said carefully. "Think about it. You need a wife, they need money. Everyone wins." Diego left the cantina that night feeling disgusted with himself for even listening to such a proposal. But as days passed and his parents' pressure increased, Felipe's words kept echoing in his mind. A week later, he found himself riding up the treacherous mountain path toward the Delgado homestead. The journey took most of the day, winding through pine forests and across rushing streams. When he finally reached the small wooden house, he almost turned back. The poverty was heartbreaking. The roof sagged in places. The windows were patched with cloth instead of glass, and the small garden showed signs of a family struggling to feed itself. This wasn't just hard times, this was desperation. Carlos Delgado emerged from the house, a man who looked older than his 50 years. His clothes were patched and repatched, his hands calloused from years of hard work that had yielded little reward. Señor Herrera, Carlos said, his voice heavy with shame. Felipe told me you might come. They sat on the porch as the sun began to set and Carlos told his story. A bad harvest, medical bills for his sick wife, borrowed money at impossible interest rates, the spiral of debt that trapped so many mountain families. The men he owed weren't patient creditors. They'd made it clear that if he couldn't pay soon, his family would pay in other ways. I have a daughter, Carlos said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maria Elena, she's 22, strong, healthy. But senor, I must warn you, she's not like other girls. She's independent, stubborn. Many men have tried to court her, but she's refused them all. Where is she now? Working with the horses. She has a way with animals that I've never seen before. But with people, Carlos shook his head. She trusts no one, especially men. She won't like this arrangement. Then why are you even considering it? Carlos looked at Diego with eyes full of pain. Because if I don't find a way to pay these debts, they'll take her anyway. At least with you, I know she'll be safe. You're known as an honorable man. As if summoned by their conversation, a young woman appeared from behind the house, leading a magnificent black horse. Even from a distance, Diego could see why the village men had been drawn to her. She moved with a confidence that was almost dangerous, her long dark hair flowing free despite the evening wind. When she saw Diego, she stopped immediately. Her eyes narrowed as she studied him, taking in his expensive clothes and well-fed horse. Without a word, she turned and walked back the way she'd come. She knows why you're here, Carlos said sadly. She's refused to speak to me about it, but she knows. The negotiation was brief and painful. Diego named a sum that would clear all debts and leave the family comfortable for years. Carlos accepted with tears in his eyes. The wedding would happen in 1 week, giving Diego time to make arrangements and giving the family time to prepare. As Diego rode back down the mountain that night, he wondered what kind of man he'd become. He just bought a wife like cattle at market, and the worst part was that it solved all his problems. His parents would be satisfied, the family line would continue, and he'd fulfilled his duty. But as he thought about the defiant young woman who'd looked at him with such contempt, he realized his problems might just be beginning. He'd bought a wife, but he had no idea how to handle a woman who clearly had no intention of being owned by anyone. The arrangement was made. The money would be delivered, and in 1 week, Maria Elena Delgado would become Maria Elena Herrera, whether she wanted to or not. The wagon that brought Maria Elena to the Herrera ranch looked like it was carrying a prisoner rather than a bride. She sat stiffly in the back, her few belongings packed in a single worn bag, her face turned away from Diego, who rode alongside them. The simple white dress her mother had sewn for the ceremony was already wrinkled and dusty from the journey. Diego had tried to make conversation during the 3-hour trip down the mountain, but Maria Elena had responded with nothing but cold silence. Her dark eyes stared at the passing landscape as if memorizing every tree and rock, perhaps planning her escape route. When they finally arrived at the ranch house, Diego's workers gathered to catch a glimpse of their boss's new wife. The house itself was impressive. 2 stories of adobe and wood, with a red tile roof and a wraparound porch that offered shade from the afternoon sun. Gardens filled with colorful flowers surrounded the main building, and beyond that stretched the corrals and barns that housed hundreds of cattle and horses. "Welcome to your new home," Diego said, offering his hand to help her down from the wagon. Maria Elena ignored his gesture and jumped down herself, landing gracefully despite her dress. She stood there for a moment, taking in the sight of the ranch, her expression unreadable. "Maria Elena," Diego began, "I know this isn't easy for you, but I want you to know that—" "Where do I sleep?" she interrupted, her voice flat and cold. "I've prepared the master bedroom for you. It has a beautiful view of the valley, and I thought you might—" "I'll sleep in the barn," the gathered workers murmured among themselves. Diego felt heat rise in his cheeks, embarrassed by her public rejection but trying to maintain his composure. "That's not necessary. The bedroom is perfectly comfortable, and as my wife you should—" "I am not your wife," Maria Elena said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I am your purchase. There's a difference." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Diego's foreman, an older man named Tomas, cleared his throat and began directing the workers back to their duties. But Diego knew they'd all be talking about this moment for weeks. "Very well," Diego said quietly. "I'll have bedding brought to the barn." Maria Elena nodded curtly and walked away. leaving Diego standing alone with his wounded pride. The next few days established a pattern that frustrated everyone on the ranch. Maria Elena rose before dawn and went straight to the horse corrals, spending her days working with the animals rather than learning about her new home. She refused to eat meals in the main house, instead taking her food outside to eat alone. When Diego bought her new dresses, beautiful gowns that cost more than most people earned in a year, she left them folded on his doorstep, unworn. "Señor, she's making you look like a fool," Toma said one evening as they watched Maria Elena train a difficult horse that 3 experienced cowboys had given up on. "The men are starting to talk." "Let them talk," Diego replied, though he couldn't hide his frustration. "She'll come around." But Maria Elena showed no signs of coming around. If anything, she seemed more determined each day to establish that she belonged to no one. When the local priest came to discuss proper wifely duties, she listened politely and then asked him detailed questions about animal husbandry that left the poor man blushing and stammering. When Diego's mother arrived with advice about running a household, Maria Elena spent the entire visit in the corrals, emerging only to bid her goodbye with dirt under her fingernails and hay in her hair. The ranch workers were divided in their opinions about the new señora. Some thought she was disrespectful and strange, whispering that no good could come from a woman who acted like a man, but others watched in amazement as she handled horses that had been considered untrainable, approaching them with a fearlessness that bordered on reckless. "She talks to them," said Pedro, one of the younger cowboys. "I swear she talks to the horses and they understand her." It was true. Maria Elena had a way with animals that defied explanation. She could calm a spooked stallion with just her voice, and horses that kicked and bit other handlers would follow her around like gentle pets. Within a week, she'd made more progress with the problem horses than the ranch had seen in months. But with the humans on the ranch, she remained distant and suspicious. Diego tried different approaches to reach her. He left books in her path, thinking she might enjoy reading, only to find them returned to his desk unopened. He arranged for the cook to prepare mountain foods that might remind her of home, but she continued to eat alone. He even offered to take her to town to buy whatever she needed, an offer she declined with a look that suggested he'd offered to take her to her own execution. The breaking point came during dinner on her 8th day at the ranch. Diego had insisted she join him in the dining room, going so far as to have the cook prepare her favorite meal based on information from her father. When she didn't appear, he went looking for her. He found her in the barn, sitting on a bale of hay and sharing her dinner with a stray cat. She looked up when he entered, her expression wary. "You're supposed to be in the house," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I'm eating," she replied simply. "In the barn, like an animal." Something dangerous flashed in her eyes. "Is that what you think I am? An animal you bought to breed?" "That's not what I meant, and you know it. Do I?" She stood up, and Diego was surprised by how small she looked in the vast barn, yet how much presence she commanded. "You paid money for me. You brought me here against my will. You expect me to wear your clothes, eat your food, sleep in your bed, and be grateful for the privilege. How is that different from buying livestock?" "Because I'm trying to take care of you," Diego said, his frustration finally showing. "I'm trying to give you a good life." "Whose idea of a good life?" "Yours?" Maria Elena laughed bitterly. "You never asked what I wanted. You never asked if I wanted to leave my mountains, my family, my freedom. You saw something you thought you needed, and you bought it. Your father needed help, my father needed money, and you needed a wife. So you made a deal that suited both of you perfectly. The only person whose needs didn't matter in this arrangement was me." Diego stared at her, realizing for the first time how the situation must look from her perspective. He'd been so focused on his own problems, his parents' expectations, his loneliness, his duty to continue the family line, that he'd never really considered what this meant for her. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You're right. I didn't think about what you wanted." The apology seemed to surprise her. She studied his face as if looking for signs of deception. "But you're here now," Diego continued, "and I'm trying to make the best of it. For both of us. The best of it." Maria Elena shook her head. "The best would be if you sent me home." "I can't do that, won't do that," she corrected. "You've paid for me and you intend to get your money's worth." Before Diego could respond, she walked past him toward the barn door. She paused at the threshold without turning around. "I'll never love you," she said quietly. No matter how kind you try to be, no matter how patient you are, no matter what you buy me or give me, you can own my body, but you'll never own my heart." Then she was gone, leaving Diego alone in the barn with the uncomfortable realization that she was probably right. He'd bought himself a wife, but he was beginning to understand that a real marriage required something that couldn't be purchased at any price. Outside, Maria Elena looked up at the stars that seemed so much dimmer here in the valley than they had in her mountains. She touched the simple gold band on her finger, a ring that felt more like a chain than a symbol of love. Tomorrow would bring another day of polite warfare, another day of proving that she couldn't be tamed or owned. But tonight, alone under the vast sky, she allowed herself to feel the loneliness that she kept hidden behind her defiance. She was married to a man she barely knew, living among strangers, trapped in a life she'd never chosen. And the worst part was that sometimes, when Diego looked at her with those patient, sad eyes, she almost wanted to stop fighting. Almost. The escape attempt came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Maria Elena's arrival at the ranch. Diego should have seen it coming. She'd been studying the horses with unusual intensity, testing their responses to her commands, and asking innocent questions about the mountain trails that bordered the ranch. When Tomas burst into Diego's office at dawn, his weathered face tight with concern, Diego knew immediately what had happened. "She's gone, senor. Took Rayo and headed for the high country." Diego's blood ran cold. Rayo was the fastest horse on the ranch, but also the most temperamental. In the hands of an experienced rider, he was magnificent. In the mountains with someone he didn't trust completely, he could be deadly. "How long has she been gone?" Pedro saw her riding out about 2 hours ago. "Thought she was just taking an early ride like usual until we found her bed hadn't been slept in." Diego was already reaching for his jacket. "Get 3 men and meet me at the North Corral. We ride in 5 minutes." The trail was easy to follow at first. Rayo's hoofprints led steadily upward, following the old mining road that wound into the Sierra Madre. But as the path grew steeper and rockier, the tracks became harder to read. Diego's heart pounded as he thought about all the ways this could go wrong. There were cliffs that dropped hundreds of feet, unmarked mine shafts, and weather that could change from sunny to deadly in minutes. They found her 4 hours later at a place where the trail forked, Rayo standing calmly while Maria Elena sat on a fallen log, her head in her hands. She looked up when she heard their horses approaching, and Diego was shocked to see tears on her cheeks. "The trail," she said quietly. "I couldn't remember which way led home." Diego dismounted and approached her slowly, as if she were one of the wild horses she worked with so expertly. "Maria Elena, what were you thinking? These mountains are dangerous, especially alone." "I was thinking I wanted to go home," she replied, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I was thinking that maybe if I rode far enough and fast enough, I could pretend this whole nightmare never happened." "And now?" She gestured at the maze of trails that branched out in all directions. "Now I realize I don't even know the way back to my own family. 3 weeks away from the mountains and I'm already lost." Diego felt something twist in his chest at the defeat in her voice. This wasn't the defiant woman who'd challenged him at every turn. This was someone who'd reached the end of her rope and found nothing to hold on to. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's go home." "Home?" Maria Elena looked at him with eyes that held too much pain for someone so young. "Where exactly is that?" The ride back was quiet, but something had shifted between them. When they reached the ranch, instead of disappearing into the barn as usual, Maria Elena followed Diego to the main house. She didn't speak, but she didn't run away either. That afternoon, while reviewing the week's cattle reports, Diego heard shouting from the south pasture. He looked out his office window to see his men gathered around one of the corrals, their voices carrying a mix of excitement and concern. When he reached the fence, he understood why. A massive bull, one they'd been trying to move for weeks, was standing calmly in the center of the corral while Maria Elena brushed his coat. The animal that had charged 3 experienced cowboys just yesterday was now docile as a house cat under her touch. "How is she doing that?" whispered Pedro, his voice full of awe. "I don't know," Tomas replied. "But that bull's been nothing but trouble since we brought him in. Look at him now, gentle as a lamb." Diego watched, fascinated as Maria Elena worked around the massive animal without a trace of fear. She moved with confidence, reading the bull's body language and responding to signals that the other cowboys couldn't even see. When she finished, she gave the bull a gentle pat on the neck and climbed out of the corral. He just needed someone to listen to him, she said simply when she noticed Diego watching. Listen to him? Animals tell you everything you need to know if you pay attention. He was scared, not angry. Scared animals act out just like scared people do. The comment hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that went beyond bull handling. Over the next few days, Diego found himself watching Maria Elena work with a new appreciation. She had skills that his ranch hands, experienced as they were, couldn't match. She could spot a sick cow from 50 yards away, calm a spooked horse with just her voice, and handle the most difficult animals with an ease that seemed almost magical. But it was her interaction with the ranch hands that surprised him most. While she remained polite but distant with Diego, she'd begun to develop friendships with some of the workers. Pedro especially seemed drawn to her knowledge of horses, following her around like an eager student as she explained techniques he'd never seen before. She's teaching me more about horses in a week than I learned in 10 years, Pedro confided to Diego one evening. But senor, she's still so sad. Sometimes I catch her staring at the mountains with this look in her eyes like she's grieving for something. Diego knew that look. He'd seen it every day since she'd arrived, and it made him feel like the worst kind of man. He'd given her comfort, security, and material possessions, but he'd taken away her freedom, her family, and her choice. No amount of money could compensate for that loss. The confrontation he'd been dreading came the following Saturday. Diego's parents arrived for their monthly visit, bringing with them Diego's aunt and uncle who'd come to meet the new addition to the family. Diego had tried to prepare Maria Elena, explaining the importance of making a good impression, but she'd listened with the same polite indifference she showed to most of his requests. The dinner was a disaster from the moment his family walked into the dining room. Maria Elena appeared wearing one of her simple work dresses instead of the elegant gown Diego had laid out for her. Her hair was braided practically rather than styled fashionably, and there was still dirt under her fingernails from her afternoon work with the horses. "So this is your wife," Doña Carmen said, her tone carefully neutral as she looked Maria Elena up and down. "It's nice to meet you," Maria Elena replied politely, but she didn't lower her eyes or curtsy as his family expected. The conversation that followed was stilted and uncomfortable. Diego's relatives asked the usual questions about family background and accomplishments, clearly expecting answers that would place Maria Elena in their social world. Instead, they got stories about mountain life, animal handling, and skills that had nothing to do with running a proper household. "Do you play piano?" asked Diego's aunt. "No, but I can break a wild horse. Come on, do you speak French?" "No, but I speak horse, cow, and goat." "Can you arrange flowers?" "I can deliver a calf, stitch up a wound, and track a lost animal for miles." With each exchange, the temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. Diego watched his family's expressions grow more dismayed, while Maria Elena remained perfectly calm, answering their questions with honest simplicity that highlighted how different their worlds were. The breaking point came when his mother asked about children. "Of course, you'll want to start a family soon," Doña Carmen said with the confidence of someone who'd never had her plans questioned. "The ranch needs heirs, and you're not getting any younger." Maria Elena set down her fork and looked directly at Diego's mother. "I think that's a conversation for my husband and me to have privately." "Nonsense," his father interjected. "Family planning is family business. We have a right to know when we can expect grandchildren." "With respect, Don Roberto," Maria Elena said, her voice steady but with an edge that made Diego nervous. "You have no rights regarding my body or my choices. If and when Diego and I decide to have children, we'll let you know." The silence that followed was deafening. Diego's family stared at Maria Elena as if she'd grown a second head, while she continued eating her dinner as if nothing unusual had happened. After his family left, clearly scandalized by his choice of wife, Diego found Maria Elena in the barn as usual. She was grooming Rayo, her movements steady and soothing. "That could have gone better," Diego said, leaning against the stall door. "Could it?" Maria Elena didn't look up from her work. "Your family wants a daughter-in-law who'll bow and scrape and produce babies on command. That's not who I am. I know that, do you?" She finally turned to face him. "Because sometimes I think you're waiting for me to transform into the kind of wife they expect. The kind of wife you probably wanted when you made this arrangement." Diego was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. "You're right," he said finally. "When I first thought about getting married, I imagined someone different. Someone who would fit into my world without changing anything. And now? Now I'm starting to think my world might need changing. It was the first truly honest thing he'd said to her since she'd arrived, and Maria Elena seemed to recognize that. She studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation, but finding only sincerity. "Your family won't accept me," she said quietly. "Then they'll have to learn to accept my choices." And if they don't? Diego thought about his inheritance, his place in the family business, all the expectations he'd lived with his entire life. Then he looked at the woman who'd challenged everything he thought he knew about strength, courage, and authenticity. Then I guess I'll have to decide what matters more, their approval or my. The storm struck without warning on a Tuesday night in late September. What had started as light rain quickly turned into a violent tempest that sent the ranch hands scrambling to secure equipment and bring the horses into the barns. But the cattle, scattered across hundreds of acres of grazing land, were trapped in the open as lightning split the sky and thunder shook the ground. Diego was pulling on his boots when Maria Elena appeared in the doorway of his bedroom, already dressed in her work clothes and carrying a heavy coat. "The cattle," she said simply. "It's too dangerous. We'll assess the damage in the morning. By morning, half the herd could be dead or scattered across 3 counties. She turned to leave, then paused. "Are you coming or do I go alone?" Something in her tone, not challenging this time but matter of fact, made Diego realize she wasn't asking for permission. She was going out into that storm regardless of what he said. The thought of her facing the lightning and flooded streams alone was more terrifying than the storm itself. "Give me 2 minutes," he said. They rode out together into the chaos, joined by Tomas and 3 other ranch hands brave enough to face the weather. The rain came down in sheets so thick they could barely see 10 feet ahead, and the lightning turned the night into a series of brilliant, terrifying snapshots. Maria Elena led them toward the north pasture, where the largest group of cattle had been grazing. But when they reached the area, they found it empty except for broken fence posts and muddy ground churned up by hundreds of hooves. "They'll head for higher ground," Maria Elena shouted over the thunder. "Follow me!" What followed was the longest night of Diego's life. They chased scattered groups of cattle through the storm, Maria Elena somehow able to read the landscape and predict where the frightened animals would go. She rode Rayo with a fearlessness that would have been reckless if it weren't so effective, guiding groups of cattle toward shelter and safety, while the rest of them followed her lead. When a flash flood threatened to trap a dozen calves in a low-lying area, Maria Elena didn't hesitate. She rode straight into the rushing water, somehow managing to guide her horse through the current while herding the young cattle to safety. Diego's heart stopped as he watched her disappear into the churning brown water, only to emerge on the other side with the calves following behind her like she was their mother. By dawn, they'd saved nearly the entire herd. Only 3 cattle were lost, a miraculous outcome considering the severity of the storm. But the cost was evident in their exhausted horses, and the bone-deep weariness that came from fighting nature for 12 straight hours. They made it back to the ranch house just as the sun was rising, painting the devastated landscape in soft golden light. Maria Elena slid off Rayo's back and nearly collapsed, catching herself against the fence post. Diego was beside her in an instant. "I'm fine," she said automatically, but her voice was weak and her hands were shaking. "No, you're not." Without asking permission, Diego scooped her up in his arms. She was too exhausted to protest as he carried her into the house and up to the guest bedroom. Not the master suite he'd originally prepared for her, but a smaller, cozier room that somehow felt more appropriate. "I need to check on the horses," she mumbled as he set her down on the bed. "Tomas is handling the horses. You need rest." Diego helped her out of her soaked boots and wrapped a warm blanket around her shoulders. When he brought her hot tea and dry clothes, she looked at him with an expression he'd never seen before. Not gratitude exactly, but something softer than her usual wariness. "You didn't have to come out there," she said quietly. "It wasn't your responsibility. Yes, it was. They're my cattle, my ranch. But you could have waited until morning, sent the hands out to do the dangerous work. Most ranch owners would have." Diego sat down in the chair beside the bed, suddenly realizing how tired he was. Most ranch owners don't have wives who would ride into a flash flood to save a bunch of calves. The word wives hung between them, different somehow than all the other times it had been spoken. This time it didn't sound like a business arrangement or a legal obligation. This time it sounded like a partnership. "Why did you do it?" Diego asked. Risk your life for cattle that, well, that represent the life you never wanted. Maria Elena was quiet for so long that Diego thought she might have fallen asleep. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and thoughtful. My grandfather taught me that animals depend on us completely. They can't save themselves from storms or floods or predators. If we take responsibility for them, we take responsibility for their lives. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. It doesn't matter if I chose to be here or not. Those cattle didn't choose anything either. They deserved to be protected. The simple moral clarity of her answer humbled Diego. While he'd been thinking about financial losses and insurance claims, she'd been thinking about responsibility and care. It was the same instinct that made her gentle with injured animals and patient with difficult horses. "Tell me about your grandfather," Diego said. And surprisingly, she did. As the morning sun streamed through the windows and the exhaustion of the long night caught up with them both, Maria Elena talked about the old man who'd raised her after her parents died, who'd taught her everything she knew about animals and mountains and surviving in a harsh world. He used to say that strength isn't about forcing your will on others, she said, her voice growing drowsy. It's about knowing when to be gentle and when to be firm, when to lead and when to follow. He said most people never learn the difference. What else did he teach you? That the mountains don't care about your plans or your pride. They'll teach you humility whether you want to learn it or not. She smiled sleepily. He would have liked you, I think. Even though I bought his granddaughter like livestock. The harsh words slipped out before Diego could stop them, but Maria Elena didn't flinch. He would have understood why you did it, and he would have seen what I'm starting to see, which is that you're not quite the man you pretend to be. Before Diego could ask what she meant, Maria Elena had fallen asleep, her breathing deep and even. He sat watching her for a long time, studying the face that had become so familiar yet remained mysterious. In sleep, the guardedness disappeared, revealing someone younger and more vulnerable than the defiant woman who challenged him daily. When he finally left her to rest, Diego found himself thinking about her grandfather's words. Strength, humility, knowing when to be gentle and when to be firm. He'd spent most of his adult life trying to live up to his father's image of strength, controlling, commanding, never showing weakness. But watching Maria Elena work with animals and people, he was beginning to understand that there might be different kinds of strength. That afternoon, while Maria Elena slept, Diego found himself in the kitchen with their cook, an elderly woman named Rosa who'd worked for his family for 20 years. She saved the herd, Rosa said without prompting. Tomas told me what happened out there. Said he's never seen anything like it. She's remarkable, Diego agreed. And troubled, Rosa added, giving him a knowing look. That girl carries sadness like other people carry water. Always with her, always weighing her down. I know. Do you? Because saving cattle in a storm is easier than saving a human heart. Animals trust or they don't, but people have to heal before they can trust. That evening, when Maria Elena finally emerged from the guest room, she found Diego in his study reading by lamplight. She knocked softly on the doorframe. "Thank you," she said simply, "for today. For letting me rest. Thank you for saving my cattle," she almost smiled. Our cattle. The correction was small, but it represented a shift that both of them felt. For the first time, Maria Elena had claimed ownership of something at the ranch, had used the word our instead of your. "Maria Elena," Diego said carefully, "I want you to know that you don't have to earn your place here. You don't have to prove your worth by risking your life in storms. Don't I?" She leaned against the doorframe, looking suddenly weary again. "I'm here because you paid money for me. If I'm not useful, if I don't contribute something, then what am I? You're my wife. Am I really?" The question was asked without bitterness, just genuine curiosity. "Because sometimes I feel more like a guest who's overstayed her welcome. Or a problem you're trying to solve." Diego set down his book and really looked at her, this woman who'd faced down a storm without flinching but seemed so uncertain about her place in his life. "I don't know what you are," he said honestly. "I thought I was buying a wife, but what I got was something I don't have words for. Someone who challenges everything I thought I knew about courage and strength and what it means to care for something. Is that good or bad?" "I think," Diego said slowly, "it might be the best thing that's ever happened to me." For a moment, something vulnerable flickered in Maria Elena's eyes. Then she straightened, pulling her emotional armor back into place. "Good night, Diego." "Good night." But as she turned to leave, he called her name softly. Maria Elena, your grandfather sounds like he was a wise man. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her entire face. He was. I think you would have liked him too. After she left, Diego sat in the growing darkness thinking about storms and cattle and the strange twists that life could take. The fever started 3 days after the storm. Maria Elena had been working longer hours than usual, helping to repair fences and check on cattle that had been scattered by the weather. At first she dismissed the exhaustion as the natural result of hard work, but by evening she could barely stand. Diego found her in Rayo's stall, slumped against the wall with her eyes closed. When he touched her forehead, her skin was burning hot. Maria Elena, can you hear me? She opened her eyes with effort, but they were glassy and unfocused. I'm fine, she mumbled, trying to stand and nearly falling. Just tired. You're sick. Come on, let's get you to the house. For once, she didn't argue when he helped her walk, which worried Diego more than her fever. Maria Elena never accepted help willingly, which meant she must be feeling worse than she was admitting. By the time they reached the house, she was shivering despite the warmth of the evening. Diego helped her to the guest room she'd been using since the storm, and sent Rosa to fetch Dr. Mendez from town. It's probably just exhaustion, the doctor said after examining her. She's been pushing herself too hard, and her body is telling her to rest. Keep her warm, make sure she drinks plenty of fluids, and don't let her get up until the fever breaks. But as the night wore on, Maria Elena got worse instead of better. The fever climbed higher, and she began talking in her sleep. Sometimes in Spanish, sometimes in what sounded like the indigenous language her grandfather had taught her. She called out for her grandfather, for her parents, for the mountains she'd left behind. Diego found himself sitting by her bedside through the night, changing cool cloths on her forehead and trying to understand the fragments of her fevered dreams. In her delirium, she seemed to be back in her childhood, reliving memories of the mountain life she'd lost. Abuelo, she whispered, reaching out as if someone was there. Don't leave me alone. You're not alone, Diego said softly, taking her hand. I'm here. She turned toward his voice, though her eyes remained closed. Diego? Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry, she murmured. I tried to be strong. I tried not to be a burden. You're not a burden. You're... He paused, surprised by the words that wanted to come. You're the strongest person I know. For 3 days, Diego barely left her side. He canceled business meetings, ignored his ranch duties, and turned away visitors. Rosa brought him meals that he barely touched, more concerned with getting Maria Elena to sip water or broth than with his own needs. On the second night, when her fever spiked dangerously high, Diego found himself praying to saints he hadn't spoken to since childhood. He'd lost his first horse to illness when he was 12, and he remembered the helpless feeling of watching something he cared about slip away. The thought of losing Maria Elena, really losing her, not just to distance or anger but to death, terrified him in a way he hadn't expected. Please, he whispered to the darkness. Don't take her away. Not when I'm just starting to understand what? He asked himself. What exactly had changed between them? Everything, he realized. Somewhere between the storm and her illness, between watching her save his cattle and seeing her vulnerable in sleep, she'd stopped being the wife he'd bought and started being someone he couldn't imagine living without. The fever broke on the 4th morning. Diego woke in the chair beside her bed to find Maria Elena watching him with clear, alert eyes. You look terrible, she said. Her voice weak, but definitely her own again. Diego laughed, relief flooding through him. You've been sick for 4 days. How do you feel? Like I've been trampled by cattle. She tried to sit up and winced. How long have you been sitting there? Most of the time since you got sick. Why? The simple question caught him off guard. Why had he stayed? Why had the thought of leaving her side been unbearable? Why had her recovery felt more important than anything else in his world? Because, Diego said carefully, I was worried about you. Maria Elena studied his face with those penetrating dark eyes that seemed to see through all pretense. You were worried about your investment? No. The denial came quickly and firmly. I was worried about you. About Maria Elena. Not about my wife or my arrangement or anything else, just you. Something shifted in her expression. The walls she kept around her heart seemed to crack slightly, letting in just a hint of warmth. Why? She asked again, but softer this time. Diego stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch that had been his whole world until she'd arrived to turn it upside down. "When I first saw you," he said without turning around, "I thought you were beautiful but difficult. I thought you'd eventually settle down and learn to be content here. I thought I could be patient and kind until you accepted your new life. And now I think I was an arrogant fool." He turned back to face her. "You don't need to settle down or accept anything. You're perfect exactly as you are, wild and stubborn and fierce and genuine. You make me want to be a better man, not because you're trying to change me, but because watching you be yourself makes me realize how much of myself I've been hiding." Maria Elena was quiet for a long time, processing his words. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been so angry," she said. "Angry at you, at my father, at the situation. But mostly angry at myself for beginning to feel what? Safe," she admitted, as if the word was dangerous. "When you carried me to bed after the storm, when you sat with me during the fever, when you look at me like I'm worth something more than the price you paid, I felt safe. And that terrifies me more than any storm or wild horse or angry bull." "Why does it terrify you?" "Because safe isn't something I've ever been able to count on. People leave or die or sell you to pay their debts. Safety is an illusion, and caring about someone just gives them power to hurt you." Diego moved closer to the bed, understanding dawning on him. "Your parents died when you were young. Your grandfather died. Your father sold you. You've lost everyone you ever trusted. So why would I be stupid enough to trust again?" "Because," Diego said gently, "maybe this time it's different." "How can you know that?" "I can't. But I can promise that I'll never hurt you intentionally. Never betray your trust. Never treat you as anything less than an equal partner in whatever this becomes." Whatever this becomes? I don't know what to call it anymore. It started as an arrangement, but it's becoming something else. Something I never expected to want. He sat down on the edge of the bed, careful not to crowd her. "I'm falling in love with you, Maria Elena. With your strength and your stubbornness and the way you talk to horses like they're old friends. With your courage and your honesty and the way you make me see my own world differently." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be someone's wife when I've never even been someone's girlfriend. I don't know how to trust when everyone I've ever trusted has left me. We'll figure it out together. No expectations, no timeline, no pressure. Just see what happens when two people try to build something real instead of something forced. And if I can't, if I'm too damaged or too difficult or too set in my ways, then we'll figure that out too." Diego smiled, and for the first time in days he felt truly hopeful. "You saved my cattle in a storm, Maria Elena. I think we can handle whatever challenges come next." She was quiet for a long moment, then slowly reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were still weak from the fever, but her grip was steady. "I felt safe when you stayed with me," she admitted. "Even in the fever dreams, I knew you were there. I've never had that before. Someone who stayed when things got difficult." "I'll always stay," Diego said. "Whatever happens, wherever this goes, I'll always stay." It wasn't a declaration of love returned, but it was something more precious. It was the beginning of trust. And as Maria Elena's eyes fluttered closed in healing sleep, her hand still holding his, Diego realized that maybe they were both learning what it meant to stop fighting their feelings and start fighting for each other instead. Outside, the ranch went about its daily business under Tomas's capable supervision. The cattle grazed peacefully in the repaired pastures, the horses ran free in the corrals, and life continued its steady rhythm. But inside the quiet bedroom, two people who had started as strangers bound by duty were slowly becoming something that neither had dared to hope for. Two people choosing each other freely. Honestly and without reservation, the arrangement had become something real. And for the first time since Maria Elena had arrived at the ranch, both of them were exactly where they wanted to be. The weeks following Maria Elena's recovery brought a subtle but profound change to the ranch. She began eating breakfast with Diego in the main house, their conversations ranging from ranch business to stories of their different childhoods. She still slept in the guest room, but sometimes in the evenings she would join him in his study, reading while he worked on accounts or correspondence. It was during one of these quiet evenings that they shared their first real laugh together. Diego had been telling her about his childhood attempts to impress his father by breaking horses. which had resulted more often in Diego being broken by horses. So there I was, he said, gesturing with his pen, lying flat on my back in the mud while this mare stood over me looking absolutely disgusted with my technique. Maria Elena's laughter filled the room, rich and genuine. You were trying to show dominance. Horses don't respect dominance, they respect partnership. Something I wish someone had told me before I tried to ride El Diablo. You tried to ride El Diablo? Maria Elena's eyes widened. The black stallion with the white star? He's been on the ranch since I arrived, but no one goes near him. Because he nearly killed 3 men trying to break him, including me. He's not meant to be broken, Maria Elena said thoughtfully. Tomorrow let me show you something. The next morning, Diego watched in amazement as Maria Elena approached El Diablo's corral, with nothing but a handful of oats and endless patience. The stallion, who had been stamping and snorting at Diego's approach just minutes before, grew calm as she spoke to him in soft Spanish mixed with what sounded like horse language. Hola, guapo, she murmured, extending her hand slowly. No one's going to hurt you today. It took an hour, but eventually El Diablo allowed her to touch his neck, then his back. By the end of the week, she was riding him bareback through the pastures, the two of them moving together like they'd been partners for years. How? Diego asked one evening as they watched El Diablo follow Maria Elena around the corral like a devoted pet. I listened to what he was telling me. He'd been hurt by men who tried to force him into submission. He needed to know that I wouldn't hurt him, that I respected his strength instead of trying to crush it. Diego studied her profile in the fading light, wondering if she was talking about more than just horses. Their first kiss happened by accident 3 weeks later. Diego had been helping Maria Elena move a heavy saddle when they both reached for it at the same time. Their hands touched. They looked up simultaneously, and suddenly they were so close that Diego could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. Maria Elena, he whispered. Yes? Instead of answering with words, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers, soft and questioning. She could have pulled away, could have reminded him that physical affection wasn't part of their arrangement. Instead, she kissed him back, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. I should apologize, Diego said. Why? Because I didn't ask permission. Maria Elena smiled, the expression transforming her face. Diego Herrera, if you'd asked permission, I would have thought you were an idiot. A man who can face down a storm shouldn't be afraid to kiss his wife. His wife who's finally ready to be kissed? His wife who's been wondering what took him so long. Their courtship, for that's what it had become, a courtship within a marriage, proceeded slowly but steadily. They began holding hands during their evening walks, sharing stories from their pasts and planning improvements to the ranch together. Maria Elena's suggestions for better livestock management proved so valuable that Diego started bringing her to meetings with cattle buyers and other ranchers. She has a good head for business. Tomas observed one day after Maria Elena had negotiated a particularly favorable deal for breeding rights. And the men respect her. That's not easy for a woman to earn in this business. Diego felt a surge of pride watching Maria Elena command respect from hardened ranchers who'd initially dismissed her as Diego's pretty young wife. She'd proven herself with her knowledge, her fairness, and her willingness to work harder than anyone else. But their growing happiness was interrupted by a threat neither had anticipated. Diego had gone to the bank in the county seat, leaving Maria Elena to oversee the ranch for the day. It was a mark of how much their relationship had evolved, that he trusted her completely with the responsibility. She was in the horse barn when Don Fernando Morales, the owner of the neighboring ranch, arrived with 2 of his sons. Maria Elena had met Don Fernando once before and hadn't liked him. He was the type of man who believed wealth gave him the right to take whatever he wanted, and his eyes had lingered on her in a way that made her skin crawl. Señora Herrera, Don Fernando said, his voice oily with false courtesy. What a pleasure to see you again. Don Fernando, Maria Elena replied coolly, not stopping her work grooming one of the mares. Diego is not here today. Perhaps you could return tomorrow. Actually, it's you I came to see. Something in his tone made Maria Elena look up sharply. Don Fernando's sons had positioned themselves between her and the barn door, and she realized with growing alarm that this wasn't a social call. I've been thinking about you since we met, Don Fernando continued, moving closer. Such a waste. A beautiful woman like you married to a man who doesn't appreciate what he has. My husband appreciates me perfectly well. Thank you. Maria Elena's voice was steady, but her heart was racing. She slowly reached for the pitchfork leaning against the stall. Does he? Then why does he leave you alone so often? A real man would never let such a treasure out of his sight. A real man trusts his wife to handle herself. Maria Elena gripped the pitchfork, hoping her voice sounded more confident than she felt. And my husband will be back soon. No, he won't. He's meeting with the bank president about some loan troubles, a meeting I arranged to last several hours. Don Fernando's smile was predatory, which gives us plenty of time to get acquainted. When he lunged for her, Maria Elena was ready. She swung the pitchfork in a wide arc, catching him across the chest and sending him stumbling backward. But his sons were younger and faster, and they grabbed her arms before she could strike again. Such spirit, Don Fernando laughed, brushing dust from his shirt. I like a woman with fight in her. It makes the taming so much more satisfying. Let me go, Maria Elena snarled, struggling against the men holding her. Diego will kill you for this. Diego will never know. Who's going to tell him? You? I don't think you'll be talking much when we're finished with you. What happened next would be talked about on ranches throughout the region for years. Maria Elena suddenly went limp, causing the men holding her to relax their grip for just a moment. In that instant, she drove her elbow into one man's stomach, stomped on the other's foot with her boot heel, and broke free. Before Don Fernando could react, she had El Diablo's stall open and was vaulting onto the stallion's back. El Diablo, already agitated by the violence and shouting, erupted from the stall like a black thunderbolt. Don Fernando and his sons dove for cover as the massive stallion reared and struck, his hooves missing Don Fernando's head by inches. Maria Elena guided him toward the open barn door, and they burst into the sunlight at a full gallop. She rode straight to town, her hair streaming behind her, and her face set in grim determination. She found Diego at the bank, interrupted his meeting without apology, and told him exactly what had happened. The fury that crossed Diego's face was terrible to see. Are you hurt? No, but he said he arranged this meeting to keep you away. This was planned. Diego turned to the bank president, his voice deadly calm. Our business is finished for today. But Senor Herrera, we haven't completed. Our business is finished. The ride back to the ranch was silent, but Maria Elena could feel the rage radiating from Diego like heat from a fire. When they arrived, they found Don Fernando and his sons loading their horses, apparently having decided that retreat was the better part of valor. Morales, Diego called out, his voice carrying across the yard. Don Fernando turned, trying to muster his earlier confidence but failing. Diego, my friend, there seems to have been some misunderstanding. The punch came without warning, sending Don Fernando sprawling in the dirt. Diego stood over him, his hands clenched into fists. If you ever come near my wife again, Diego said quietly, if you ever even speak her name, I will destroy you. I will ruin your business, take your land, and make sure every person in this region knows what kind of man you really are. Don Fernando struggled to his feet, blood trickling from his nose. You can't prove anything. It's her word against mine. I don't need to prove anything. Your reputation will speak for itself once I start telling people about your interests. Diego's smile was cold. How many other women have you cornered when their husbands were away? How many other misunderstandings have there been? The color drained from Don Fernando's face. He climbed onto his horse without another word, his sons following silently behind him. After they left, Diego turned to Maria Elena, his anger transforming into something else entirely. I could have lost you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. If he had hurt you, but he didn't. I'm here, I'm safe, and he's gone. Because you saved yourself. Because you're stronger and smarter and braver than any woman has a right to be. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, carried by a messenger on a lathered horse who'd ridden hard from the capital. Diego knew before he opened it that it contained nothing good. His father's lawyer only sent urgent messages when there was trouble. Maria Elena was in the kitchen helping Rosa prepare preserves when Diego found her. The letter crumpled in his fist and his face pale with shock. What's wrong? She asked immediately, wiping her hands on her apron. My parents. They're demanding I annul our marriage. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Rosa quietly excused herself, leaving them alone in the sudden silence. Annul it? Maria Elena's voice was carefully controlled. On what grounds? Diego smoothed out the letter and read aloud. The marriage was entered into under false pretenses, as the bride's background and social status were deliberately misrepresented. Furthermore, her inability to fulfill the basic requirements of a proper wife makes the union invalid and embarrassing to the family name. They want you to divorce me because I embarrassed them. They want me to pretend our marriage never happened and choose a bride from their approved list of candidates. Diego's voice grew bitter. Apparently, my aunt has found the perfect woman, a banker's daughter from Mexico City who speaks 3 languages and plays piano. Maria Elena turned away, staring out the window at the mountains that had been her first home. What did you tell them? I haven't responded yet. I wanted to talk to you first. About what? Whether I'll agree to be discarded quietly? About whether you want to fight this together or whether… Diego paused, afraid to voice his deepest fear. Whether you think they might be right? Maria Elena spun around to face him. Right about what? About us being too different. About me being selfish to keep you here when you could have a different life, a better life. About whether love is enough when the whole world seems determined to tear us apart. For a long moment, Maria Elena studied his face, reading the doubt and fear he was trying to hide. Then she walked over and took the letter from his hands. Reading it carefully. They're threatening to disinherit you, she said finally. Yes. Cut you off from the family business. The family name. Everything you've worked for your entire life. Yes. And what did you tell them? I told you I haven't responded. Diego. Maria Elena's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. What did you tell them? Diego met her eyes, seeing not the uncertainty he'd expected, but something that looked like disappointment. I told them I needed time to consider their position. The silence that followed was deafening. Maria Elena folded the letter carefully, placed it on the kitchen table, and walked toward the door. Maria Elena, wait. No. She didn't turn around. You need time to consider whether your family's money is more important than our marriage. Take all the time you need, that's not what I meant, isn't it? Now she did turn, and Diego was shocked to see tears in her eyes. You couldn't even tell them that you wouldn't do it. You couldn't even say that you'd fight for us. Instead, you asked for time to think about it. I was trying to buy us time to figure out a solution. There is no solution, Diego. Either you choose them or you choose me. Either our love matters more than their approval, or it doesn't. There's no middle ground. She left him standing in the kitchen, her footsteps echoing through the house as she climbed the stairs to pack her belongings. The news of the family ultimatum spread through the ranch like wildfire. Tomas found Diego an hour later, sitting alone in his study with an empty whiskey glass in his hand. She's leaving, Tomas said without preamble. I know. You're going to let her go? Diego looked up at his old friend, a man who'd worked for the Herrera family for 30 years and had never once questioned Diego's decisions. What choice do I have? If I choose her, I lose everything. If I choose my family, I lose her. With respect, senor, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard you say. Excuse me? Tomas sat down uninvited, his weathered face serious. I've worked this ranch since you were in diapers. I've seen your father build this empire, watched your mother manage the household, helped raise you from a boy to a man, and I've never seen you as happy as you've been these past few months. My happiness isn't the only consideration, isn't it? Tomas leaned forward. Your parents are old, Diego. In 10 years, maybe 15, they'll be gone. Their approval, their money, their business connections, all of that is temporary. But that woman upstairs? She's your partner for life. She saved your cattle, earned the respect of your workers, and turned you from a lonely man into someone worth knowing. And you're willing to throw that away for what? Money you don't need? A family name that means nothing if you're miserable. Before Diego could respond, Rosa burst into the study. She's gone, Rosa announced, her voice thick with emotion. Took her horse and rode toward the mountains. Left this for you. She handed Diego a folded piece of paper with his name written on it in Maria Elena's careful script. With trembling hands, he opened it and read, Diego, I won't make this choice easy for you by staying and begging you to fight for our marriage. Either you believe what we have is worth fighting for, or you don't. Either you love me enough to stand up to your family, or you don't. I'm going home to my mountains, where at least the air is honest and the ground doesn't shift beneath my feet. If you decide that love matters more than money, you know where to find me. If you don't, then I wish you happiness with your banker's daughter who speaks 3 languages. Maria Elena. Diego stared at the letter until the words blurred together. Then he stood up abruptly, strode to his desk, and began writing furiously. "Tomas, I need you to send this telegram to my parents immediately," he said, sealing the message in an envelope. "And saddle Relámpago, the fastest horse we have." "Where are you going?" "To get my wife back." The ride to the Delgado homestead took 4 hours of hard travel through mountain trails that grew increasingly treacherous as night fell. Diego pushed both himself and his horse to their limits, driven by the terrible fear that he might be too late, that Maria Elena might have already decided their marriage wasn't worth saving. He found her sitting on the porch of her family's small house, still wearing her riding clothes and staring at the stars that seemed so much brighter in the thin mountain air. She didn't look surprised to see him. "That was quick," she said without standing. "I thought it would take you at least a day to decide." "I didn't need a day." Diego dismounted and approached the porch slowly, like he was approaching a wild animal that might bolt. "I needed about 5 minutes after you left to realize what an idiot I'd been." "And what conclusion did you reach?" "That you were right. There is no middle ground. There's choosing the people who want to control me, or choosing the person who loves me for who I am. There's living the life my parents planned for me, or building the life I want with you." Maria Elena finally looked at him, her expression unreadable in the moonlight. "And what did you choose?" Diego pulled the copy of his telegram from his pocket and handed it to her. She read it aloud by the light spilling from the house windows. "To Don Roberto and Doña Carmen Herrera, I will not annul my marriage to Maria Elena under any circumstances. If you cannot accept her as my wife and your daughter-in-law, then you have chosen to lose a son. The ranch, the money, and the family name mean nothing to me without her. I choose love over legacy. Signed, Diego Herrera." "You sent this?" "An hour ago. By now they've probably already written me out of the will." Maria Elena stared at the telegram, tears streaming down her face. "Diego, what have you done?" "You've given up everything for me." "No," he said, climbing the porch steps to kneel beside her chair. "I've given up things that don't matter for the one thing that does. You're not just my wife, Maria Elena. You're my partner, my best friend, my heart. What good is money without someone to share it with? What good is a family name if it comes with the price of losing the person who makes life worth living? But your inheritance, I'll earn my own money. We'll build our own ranch, create our own legacy. And if we fail, if we lose everything and end up with nothing but each other, then we'll still be richer than any couple who stays together for duty instead of love." Maria Elena threw her arms around his neck, sobbing against his shoulder. "I was so scared you would choose them. I was so scared that what we have wouldn't be enough." "It's everything," Diego whispered, holding her tight. "You're everything." They stayed on the porch until dawn, talking about their future and making plans that had nothing to do with family approval or social expectations. When the sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The ride back to the ranch was different from any journey either had taken before. They rode side by side, hands occasionally touching as they guided their horses along the familiar trails. There was no urgency now, no desperation or fear. They had chosen each other completely, and that choice had freed them from everything else. When they arrived at the ranch, they found Tomas waiting with a stack of telegrams and letters. "Your parents responded," he said simply, handing Diego the messages. The first telegram was from his father. "You are no longer my son. Do not contact this family again." The second was from his mother. 5 years had passed since Diego chose love over legacy, and the transformation was evident in every corner of the ranch. What had once been a traditional cattle operation had evolved into something innovative and prosperous, guided by the combined vision of two people who had learned to see opportunity where others saw only obstacles. Maria Elena stood in the main corral, watching their newest acquisition, a herd of wild horses that other ranchers had deemed untrainable. She no longer wore the simple work clothes of her early days at the ranch, but her elegant riding outfit was practical rather than decorative, designed for a woman who still spent her days working alongside the animals she loved. "They're beautiful," said Elena Sandoval, a young woman who had traveled from 3 states away to learn Maria Elena's methods of horse training. "But they look so fierce." "Fierce isn't the same as untrainable," Maria Elena replied, her eyes tracking the movement of a magnificent gray stallion. They just haven't found anyone willing to speak their language yet. The horse training school had been Diego's idea, born from watching his wife's reputation spread throughout the region. Ranchers who had once dismissed her as Diego's mountain wife now sought her expertise, paying premium prices for horses trained using her methods. What had started as a way to supplement their income had become a thriving business that drew students from across Mexico and beyond. Señora Herrera, called Pedro, now the ranch's head trainer, the delegation from Texas has arrived. Maria Elena smiled. The Texas cattlemen had come to see the breeding program she and Diego had developed, combining the hardiness of mountain cattle with the size and meat quality of plains breeds. It was exactly the kind of innovation that would have been impossible under the conservative management of Diego's parents. She found Diego in their office, a room that bore no resemblance to the formal study where he'd once worked alone. Charts covered the walls showing bloodlines, breeding schedules, and training programs. 2 desks sat side by side, both covered with correspondence from ranchers, buyers, and students. This was the workspace of partners, not a traditional husband and wife. How did the meeting with the bank go? Maria Elena asked, settling into her chair. Better than expected. They're approving the loan for the new breeding facility. Diego looked up from his papers with a grin. Seems our reputation for innovation has reached even the conservative bankers. And the interest rate? Lower than what my father used to get, back when the Herrera name guaranteed anything he wanted. They shared a look of quiet satisfaction. The ranch they had built together was not only successful but respected throughout the region. Diego's business acumen combined with Maria Elena's understanding of animal behavior had created something unique, an operation that other ranchers studied and tried to emulate. The children are asking about the fiesta plans, Maria Elena said, referring to the annual celebration they hosted for their workers and their families. Which children? Ours or the entire village worth that seems to live here now? Maria Elena laughed. Their ranch had indeed become a gathering place for the community. The workers' families lived in comfortable houses they'd built on the property. The training school brought visitors from around the world, and their own 3 children, Miguel, age 4, Isabella, age 2, and baby Carlos, filled the house with laughter that had been missing during Diego's bachelor years. All of them. Miguel wants to show off his rope tricks, and little Isabella insists she's old enough to help with the horse demonstrations. She's only 2 years old. Try telling her that. She has her mother's stubbornness and her father's confidence. It's a dangerous combination. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Thomas entered, his face showing the mixture of excitement and nervousness that usually meant important news. Señora, you have visitors. The Texas delegation? No, señor. Your parents. The silence that followed was profound. In 5 years, Diego's parents had maintained their silence, refusing all contact despite the birth of their grandchildren and the ranch's growing success. Maria Elena had long ago stopped hoping for reconciliation, focusing instead on building relationships with Diego's sister Isabella and the few family members who had chosen to maintain contact. Are you sure? Diego asked. Very sure. Don Roberto and Doña Carmen are waiting in the front parlor. They look older, señor. Diego and Maria Elena exchanged glances, having a full conversation without words. They had built a good life without his parents' approval. But family wounds never fully healed until they were properly tended. We'll see them together, Maria Elena said, taking Diego's hand. They found his parents sitting stiffly in the parlor, looking around at the changes Maria Elena had made to the room. Gone were the formal portraits and expensive but uncomfortable furniture. In their place were family photographs, comfortable chairs arranged for conversation, and toys scattered in the corners where their grandchildren played. Papa, Mama, Diego said carefully. This is unexpected. Don Roberto looked older than his 65 years, his hair completely gray and his face marked by lines that spoke of worry and regret. Doña Carmen appeared fragile in a way that had nothing to do with age. Diego, his mother said softly, you look well. I am well. We both are. We know, Don Roberto said gruffly. We've been hearing stories about this place for years, about your success, your innovations, your reputation. And what do you think of what you've heard? I think, his father said slowly, that I may have made a mistake. The admission hung in the air like something fragile and precious. Maria Elena squeezed Diego's hand. offering silent support while giving him the space to navigate this long-awaited moment. "What kind of mistake?" Diego asked. "The kind where pride becomes more important than family, where tradition becomes more important than happiness." Don Roberto looked directly at Maria Elena for the first time. "Where prejudice becomes more important than getting to know the woman my son chose to love." Maria Elena met his gaze steadily. "It's been 5 years, Don Roberto. What changed your mind?" "My grandson changed my mind." The answer surprised them both. "Your grandson?" "Roberto, Isabella's boy. He's been visiting you, hasn't he? Coming here with his mother when she travels north?" Diego nodded. Isabella had indeed brought her 5-year-old son for several visits despite the family tension. "Last week," Doña Carmen continued, "he told us about his visits here, about his uncle Diego who teaches him to ride, and his aunt Maria Elena who talks to horses, and his cousins who live on the most wonderful ranch in the world. He asked us why we never come to visit," Don Roberto added. "When we told him we were estranged from your family, he asked why, and when we tried to explain, we realized how foolish our reasons sounded when spoken to a child." "So you came to see for yourselves?" Maria Elena asked. "We came to apologize," Doña Carmen said, tears in her eyes. "To you both, but especially to you, Maria Elena. We judged you without knowing you, dismissed you without seeing what kind of woman you really are. That was wrong of us." Before anyone could respond, the sound of children's laughter echoed from the back of the house. Little Miguel burst into the room chasing a ball and stopping short when he saw the strangers. "Papa," he said in the serious tone 4-year-olds used for important announcements, "there are people here." "Yes, mijo. These are your abuelos, your father's parents." Miguel studied his grandparents with the frank curiosity of childhood. "The ones who don't visit?" "Miguel?" Maria Elena said gently, but Don Roberto held up a hand. "No, let him speak." "Yes, boy, we're the ones who don't visit. We've been foolish old people who forgot that family is more important than pride." Miguel considered this seriously. "Mama says foolish people can become wise if they try hard enough." "Your mama is a very smart woman," Doña Carmen said, smiling through her tears. May I give you a hug?" The embrace between grandmother and grandson broke down the last of the barriers. Soon Isabella toddled in from the kitchen, covered in flour from helping Rosa bake bread, and baby Carlos woke from his nap demanding attention. Within an hour, Don Roberto was teaching Miguel card tricks while Doña Carmen helped Isabella cook in her toy kitchen. That evening, after his parents had settled into the guest rooms they'd been offered and the children were asleep, Diego and Maria Elena walked through their moonlit ranch. "Do you think they've really changed?" Maria Elena asked. "I think they've realized what they lost when they chose pride over love. Whether they've changed enough to build a real relationship with our family. We'll see. Are you willing to try?" Diego stopped walking and pulled her into his arms. "With you beside me, I'm willing to try anything. You taught me that love is stronger than stubbornness, that partnership is more valuable than control, and that the best things in life are the ones we choose freely, rather than the ones we inherit." "You taught me a few things too," Maria Elena replied, standing on her toes to kiss him. "You taught me that some cages are actually doors, that sometimes being bought can lead to being truly valued, and that the right person can make anywhere feel like home." 10 years later, as they watched their children play in the fields they'd cultivated together, Maria Elena and Diego reflected on the journey that had brought them from a desperate transaction to a love story that had become legend in the